February. So we try to listen to those who attended the conference and get feedback on what were the most popular sessions, and then present those again on a webinar format so that the more people in the museum community can benefit from it. I also would like to acknowledge our funder, the California Arts Council. This webinar is supported in part by the California Arts Council of State Agency. You can learn more about that state agency at www.arts.ca.gov. I do have to, on their behalf, also state a disclaimer that any findings, opinions, or conclusions contained herein are not necessarily those of the California Arts Council. So that's really all the housekeeping that we have. We now look forward to hearing from our presenters about their wonderful projects that they have going on at their institutions. And I'd like to introduce Christine Lashaw, Experienced Developer at the Oakland Museum of California. Thank you, Christine.
Hi, thank you, Celeste. Hello, everybody. And so just to a little bit of a further explanation of who I am at the Oakland Museum. I am what's called an experienced developer. And what that means is that I am the visitor advocate on exhibition teams. So I partner with curators to translate content into actual experiences for visitors. So this session is about creating spaces that are responsive to hot topics. Next slide, please. So as museums as a whole struggle with how to maintain relevance, OMCA has been thinking about what we can do to have social impact in our communities through responsiveness. And so I've been working on an experimental responsive exhibition space here since 2015, and it's called History Now. I'm going to talk about that space a little bit later. But I wanted to talk about our panel, which includes museum practitioners who are working on exhibitions, on programs, and a Oakland community project. And all of our projects experiment with different responsive times. And they range from a project that responded immediately after an event to a project that took 8 months to produce. So I'm going to start by introducing our panel. So first, we have Whitney Terry, who is an exhibitions catalyst from the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. And they will talk about MA's issue-driven exhibition model and how it's used to create collaborative exhibitions on current issues with and for the local community. Then we're going to hear from Elizabeth Gessel, Director of Public Programs, from the Museum of African Diaspora, and she will talk about the Chef in Residence program at MOAD, where in collaboration with Chef Bryant Terry, they created programming around health, sustainability, and food justice. And then finally, we will hear from Evelyn Orantes, who's an independent cultural arts consultant, and she will talk about the Oakland Junction, an artist and community-driven series of projects in response to Oakland's urgent concerns. So all of us come from institutions that have similar values around community engagement. And when we met and talked with each other, we explored why we do these projects beyond driving audience. And so I want to start by sharing some of our thoughts. So we believe that it's our responsibility as institutions that hold power to develop projects which are responsive to what's happening in our communities, whether that's locally, statewide, nationally, or globally. And this is a conscious, philosophical, and ethical decision. We also said that our institutions want to find mission-driven ways of creating and growing audience. And the outcomes from these projects really help to contribute to a community of informed citizens. So we're all unpacking what it means to be responsive and how to experiment and have productive failures. Next slide, please. So we're going to come back to this question that you see on your screen at the end of our presentation, but I wanted to put it up there right now for you to just take Take pause for a minute and think about what you think is the role of museums to be responsive to hot topics or timely community issues. So keep this in the back of your mind as we're talking, and we will come back to this later and get a chance to hear some of your thoughts. Next slide, please. So I'm going to begin with talking about a project at the Oakland Museum. So the Oakland Museum, for those of you who don't know, is an art, history, and natural sciences museum of California. It was founded as a community museum, and being responsive to our community is in our DNA. Next slide, please. So History Now is a small experimental exhibit space in the front of our history gallery. And it's a platform for dialogue around relevant contemporary issues that are in the news. And we rotate this topic every 6 months so that we can stay relevant. Now, we use an object on our collection as a jumping off point for the dialogue, and then we connect the past to the present. So the big idea for this space is that history is happening every day and you are part of shaping it. And I'm not sure if you can see, but that's actually printed on the wall in the space. So over time, we've developed a repeatable template to help make the space more nimble and responsive. And it includes these elements. Next slide, please. So we always include a topic introduction panel. And I'm going to be showing you some examples from one of our recent installations about free speech, hate speech. Next slide. So we always include 1 to 2 collection objects. So for this topic, we used a poster from 1980 for a protest against a neo-Nazi group in San Francisco. Now this became a successful counter-protest, but it also silenced free speech. And it's been a really great bridge to the complicated contemporary dialogue. Next slide, please. So next to that object, we have a large magnetic dialogue wall where visitors are able to respond to question prompts. And we rotate these prompts often, and it's set up so that we don't need a designer and that I can actually print out the prompt and rotate it as often as we like. This wall also includes an in the news headlines where we're able to print relevant online articles and post them weekly. Next slide, please. So recently we've added this activity next to the dialogue wall, and it asks visitors, where would you draw the line to limit free speech? And then they place phrases, actions, and symbols that you see here on this matrix. And so the x-axis goes from should be protected to should be prohibited. And the y-axis goes from makes me feel comfortable to makes me feel uncomfortable. So we're asking visitors to consider both their minds and their hearts. Next slide, please. And then we always include a supplemental wall where we can include additional material. So in this case, we decided to include the definition of free speech and hate speech. Next slide, please. Across from the dialogue wall, there's seating with supplemental reading material about the topic. And recently we've added some children's books. And so the image that you're looking at here is a father reading a book called Enemy Pie to his child. Next slide, please. So far we've experimented with 5 topics. So our first experiment was just this one wall that you're looking at here. And it explored the Syrian refugee crisis. And we used posters from our collection that were from World War I about the refugee crisis at that time connected to the genocide committed by the Ottoman Empire. Next slide, please. Then we did one focused on taking Native people's lands and connected that topic to the Dakota Access Pipeline issue. Next slide, please. And then we did an installation about fake news. And with this one, there were lots of opportunities to post in the news headlines, especially of Trump doing his awful thing. I don't have a picture of this, but our current installation that's up is focused on immigration, and we connect it to the Chinese Exclusion Act. Next slide, please. So what does success look like? So for us, success is a rich dialogue that's actually happening on the wall, where visitors are actually responding to the prompt. And the wall, over time, really reflects a range of viewpoints. So we love when visitors start responding to each other, and you can kind of notice that by the arrows pointing from one card to the next. Sometimes we also add additional prompts, and that's on these orange cards that you're seeing. And we sign our names, and this kind of helps keep the conversation going. One of the things that we found is that prompts that are about a specific incident really generate a lot of juicy responses. So for example, this prompt really got the conversation going, and the prompt says, what do you think about the new NFL rule that fines teams if their players kneel during the national anthem? Next slide, please. So success is also when visitors are actively engaged in talking with each other about the topic, and sometimes even debating the issue. And this happens often around this matrix activity. Next slide, please. Finally, what are our lessons learned? Our visitors are interested in contemporary content within the context of a history gallery. We also really needed to develop a repeatable template so that we aren't reinventing the wheel every time we change the topic. It's also really hard to be responsive and nimble within exhibition spaces. And even with a template, we can't be as responsive as we initially thought, but we continue to try and find new ways. And that experimentation is really the beauty of an ongoing exhibition space. So I'm going to thank you. That's the end of my presentation, and I'm going to turn it over next to Whitney.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, my name is Whitney Ford-Terry. I am the exhibitions catalyst here at the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. We are a community-based museum located in downtown Santa Cruz, and our mission is to ignite shared experiences and unexpected connections. So today I'm going to be talking about our community exhibition model and our issue-driven exhibitions in particular. So just kind of first to kind of talk a little bit about our mission and why it is we do this. Our mission kind of engages us to find, spark, preserve, and trade stories, ideas, and elements of creativity drawn from people across Santa Cruz County. So we bring people together through art, history, and culture to build stronger, more connected communities. And that's kind of our general purpose. Next slide. So we create and co-create issue-driven exhibitions with and for Santa Cruz County communities. These exhibitions happen every other year since they take so long to produce. There is an 8 to 9 month planning process, and exhibitions run from 6 to 9 months. We have programs and activities throughout, not only for members and participating collaborators of the exhibitions, but also with county and state departments that kind of help us brainstorm and problem solve other applications for these themes in the larger community. Next slide. So we do this through our theory of change model, and it's part of everything that we do. We create work that has kind of measurable outcomes using this model that you see here. And it's kind of a flow chart kind of idea where we welcome people in. We create experiences that are, bonding, bridging, and empowering so that people can leave feeling energized and inspired to make a change, make a difference, and really connect with people in their communities and also connect with the themes and content of the exhibitions that we create. Next slide. The same slide with arrows. This theory of change governs the activities that we do, the outcomes that they affect, and the impact that we seek to create in the world. This theory of change is available kind of on our website, and it's just kind of a very basic template for everything that we do here. So we use this theory of change model to create this community issue-driven model. Next slide. And this model uses art and artifacts as a catalyst for community action on a specific local issue. So this model is designed to invite the general public to get involved in making their community better in a targeted way, to empower community organizations that work on those issues to raise awareness and inspire action around their work, and to strengthen the museum's position as a community convener and catalyst. We seek to kind of be a platform that people can connect to each other through. And so, next slide. So here are kind of the basic elements of our community issue-driven exhibition model. It's used to raise awareness, understand the root causes of issues, share findings, and create shared power, all with the intent to affect change and monitor outcomes. So these community issue-driven exhibitions are platforms for learning and dialogue. They showcase art and artifacts that really kind of build empathy and allow people to kind of see why these things may be important. They are calls to action at the end of the day. They are co-designed with local partners and artists, and they are co-hosted. So not only is the exhibition itself co-created with members from the community, artists, historians, activists, but all of our programming is also collaboratively hosted as well, whether it be here at the museum, inside the exhibition itself, or out in the world. Next slide. Our first community issue-driven exhibition was Lost Childhoods in 2017, and it focused on issues facing transition-age foster youth. So that's foster youth between the ages of 18 to 25, specifically in California. We co-created the exhibition with a key partner, which was the Foster Youth Museum. The Foster Youth Museum, located in the Bay Area, has a collection of art, artifacts, and stories that were generated by foster youth and former foster youth. And it had formerly been exhibited in their collection. They kind of have pop-up showcases of this artwork throughout the community, mostly at pop-up locations and then also at child welfare conferences. We worked together with the Foster Youth Museum to co-create this 6-month public version of their signature pop-up exhibition here at the MA. We allotted kind of half of the gallery space in our largest exhibition space in the museum for the Foster Youth Museum collection and artworks. And then the other half was objects and artwork that were generated and commissioned by local artists in collaboration with foster youth from our county. Next slide. So it ended up being something that was just much more than an exhibition. With such an in-depth planning process, we ended up developing some really foundational relationships, not just with foster youth themselves, but also people who are working within the system in other capacities. So the MA and the Foster Youth Museum staff worked closely to kind of define the project from concept to completion, to curate artifacts from the collection and recruit Santa Cruz County-based community partners. We worked with over 128 local collaborators, including foster youth advocates, social workers, policymakers, and artists on this project. This first iteration in 2017 took 6 months to define the goals of the exhibition, work with artists, and kind of provide input and stories to enrich the content and the labels of the artwork. And then the exhibition itself ran for 6 months, engaging over 70,000 visitors. Next slide. Great. So this is kind of a very brief rundown of the first iteration in 2017. So the planning process started in January, and the exhibition opened in July, which is a very quick turnover to be, in conversation with 128 people and really not only listening to what they are communicating, but also like integrating these things and collaboratively working on and developing these projects. It was a very short time frame, and we needed more time. So when we brought back this process again this past year, process that began in 2018, next slide, we decided to kind of extend the planning process a little bit more. So for the next iteration of our community issue-driven exhibition, we chose to focus on social isolation of older adults. The exhibition was called We're Still Here, and the exhibition is currently running right now, just below where I am sitting. For We're Still Here, it's focused on stories of seniors in social isolation. We worked with over 140 local seniors, artists, advocates, and allies to develop the exhibition over the last year. We chose this topic in collaboration with a community planning committee. So we didn't just kind of pull it out of a hat. It was something that kind of had been percolating in conversation throughout the Santa Cruz County community. And it was something that a lot of advocates and individuals were really interested in taking a look at and doing some problem solving around. So we landed on the idea of social isolation because it's not only an issue that is relevant to our community, where in Santa Cruz County, over 54% of Santa Cruz County seniors live in experience loneliness or isolation on a regular basis. And then on kind of a global scale, 1 in 5 Americans by 2020 will be over the age of 65. We really kind of wanted to look at the issues of social isolation as, kind of a growing health epidemic. Isolation does affect your health. And we wanted to create better support systems and kind of brainstorm collaboratively how we can connect communities to create more healthy support systems. Next slide. The exhibition focuses around 5 big ideas. Those are that visitors will understand the diverse causes and impacts of loneliness on seniors. 2, that visitors will build empathy by experiencing what loneliness and isolation feels like for older adults. 3, that visitors will honor and learn from the wisdom of culturally diverse seniors and older adults. 4, that visitors will build a collective vision of a connected, inclusive, intergenerational future of Santa Cruz County. And 5, that visitors will take action beyond the exhibition to end social isolation among seniors and hopefully everybody else. Next slide. So for this process, we decided to take a little bit more time in the planning process. At the time that we first gave this session for CAM, we were still kind of in the thick of the planning process, but kind of in monthly meetings with our collaborator group of 140 people. And then we opened the exhibition several months ago and are currently running the exhibition, which has been extended by 2 months due to its popularity and people being invested in the content and asking questions, with programs ongoing about every other week. And that's basically it for me. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out and chat, and I'll go ahead and pass it along.
Hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth Gessel and I'm here at Museum of the African Diaspora. And we were founded in 2005. We're located in the Yerba Buena Arts and Culture neighborhood in San Francisco. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a like 4-block area with a dense cluster of museum and cultural institutions. The mission of our institution is MOAD, a contemporary art museum, celebrates Black cultures, ignites challenging conversations, and inspires learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we opened in 2005, and the original sort of quote unquote state-of-the-art permanent installation on the cultural adaptation of culinary practices that were transported and adapted through the transatlantic slave trade is what you see on the screen here. It was meant to be an interactive installation, and you can see there's some buttons and some screens. But of course, it was practically out-of-date technology even by the time the museum opened. And in 2013, we hired a new director. Her name was Linda Harrison, and she had great energy and was really excited to renovate and reinvigorate the museum. Next slide, please. So one of her ideas was turned into the Chef in Residence program. And this program was developed out of a conversation about how to make that permanent installation in the museum about the cultural adaptation of food practices that were transported via the transatlantic slave trade more relevant to our audience. And we were all inspired by the work of vegan cookbook author and food justice advocate Bryant Terry. We were inspired by the work he was doing, and we invited him to collaborate. And we are now in our 5th year of the Chef in Residence program at MOAD. As our Chef in Residence, Bryant works with all of us, and together we create public programming that celebrates the intersection of food, farming, health, activism, art, culture, and the African diaspora. And while we plan our events 6 months to a year out, as you know, public programming can be much more nimble than exhibitions, and we are able to respond to current issues more immediately. Bryant's work as a community leader and social justice advocate places him in a network of people all working on politically relevant issues, which then situates the museum as a location for exploring current topics. And our collaboration with him has worked well because he has an incredible following, which he uses to promote the work we are doing together. And our work together over the past 4 years has developed a consistency that allows for successful collaboration. And he has embraced his role as MOAD's Chef in Residence throughout all the work he does and in all of his media coverage. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Can you go back? Our programming with Chef in Residence Bryant Terry creates the space for us to develop mission-driven programming that is responsive and relevant to our audience. Some examples of what we've done include panel discussions on Black women, food and power, educational programs with schools in San Francisco and Oakland and with the Bayview YMCA, talks with chefs and cookbook authors from throughout the diaspora, full-day summits on relevant topics, and programs that respond to important social justice issues of the day. And of course, they all include delicious and amazing food, which is a bonus. And I'm going to tell you about 4 different programs that we've done over the years that demonstrate this process. Next slide. So Bryant is strongly influenced by and guided by the work of the Black Panther Party, and especially, of course, the free breakfast program for children. We wanted to acknowledge the connections between the activism of the 60s and the food justice movement of today. So we put on this program that included a short musical set by DJ Kava Motivation, along with a screening of a short film called From Gangs to Gardens, which is about his life and work. It included a lively conversation between Judy Juanita, who was heavily involved in running the Free Breakfast for Children program, and Jocelyn Jackson, who is one of the core members of the People's Kitchen Collective, and it was moderated by Faiza Farah of Third Space Media. Next slide, please. A really important part of the work that we do is community partnerships. And one of our favorite collaborators is the People's Kitchen Collective. They're an important link to the community activism and the Chef in Residence program. And of the many incredible things they do, this image shows a free meal for 500 people in the streets of West Oakland that they put on. Next slide. So this is an example of one of our full day summits. It was called the Art, Media, and Food Justice Summit. It was a day-long summit of presentations, panel discussions, interactive dialogue, and group strategizing for everyone interested in exploring some of the pressing issues related to public health, food, and justice, as well as learning more about the crucial role that art and media can play in creating a more healthy, just, and sustainable food system. The summit was planned several months in advance, but we were still able to include hot topics of the day, including decolonizing your diet, cultural appropriation, and one of my favorite panels was called Responding to White Supremacist Capitalist Patriarchal Violence. And that included representatives from Red Bay Coffee, Hasta Muerte Coffee, and that's an organization that's refused service to uniformed police officers here in the Bay Area, as well as Reem's Cafe. And Reem was attacked by Israeli organizations for having a mural of a Palestinian freedom fighter painted in the cafe. It also included a workshop for tools and empowerment for growing a food business. Next slide, please. So the Black Liberation and Food Justice program is an example of something that came together very quickly in response to the Global Climate Action Summit that was held at the Moscone Convention Center, which is in the Sierra Buena neighborhood that we reside in. All of these cultural institutions in the neighborhood were asked to have programming on one particular night under the umbrella of Culture for Climate. So Black Liberation and Food Justice is the program that we decided to create for that evening. And we wanted to have a conversation that was centering on ecological justice as it relates to empowering historically excluded and marginalized groups, particularly of African descent. We brought in Quentin Sankofa, who is one of the founders of Movement Generation, a grassroots ecological justice organization. And the program served as a critique of the lack of Black and Brown voices that were included in the climate justice movement, including specifically this Global Climate Action Summit itself, and critiquing it, of course, especially because those are the folks that the climate crisis impacts the most. Next slide, please. Our second day-long summit that we put on just this past April was the Postpartum Justice Summit. And for this summit, we partnered with an organization called Mothers to Mothers, which is looking at the postpartum crisis across people of color throughout the world. And they're really focused on a Black maternal mortality crisis that's going on right now in the United States. Black mothers die at a rate of more than 3 times that of white mothers in the United States. This summit was a groundbreaking event at the intersection of humanities, storytelling, community empowerment, science, and social support infrastructure. It included a powerful keynote by women's wellness expert and doula Latham Thomas. It had panels and breakout sessions that were led by experts and community participants in the field of policymaking, storytelling, women's empowerment, and postpartum traditions, postpartum food samplings, and art installations that highlighted the sanctity of culture, birth, and motherhood. Next slide. So how do we measure success in the Chef in Residence program? We look for the excitement and conversation that's generated via social media regarding the program, both prior to and after its presentation. The community engagement, particularly among people of color at the event. And by that I mean numbers as well as the passion expressed for the topic. And also by the tools provided to help people engage beyond the day of the event so that it's action-oriented as well. Next slide, please. What have we learned by doing this program? We've learned that we need to always be intentionally collaborative with community organizations, and that the power of that is revealed in both the creation of the programming and the audience that it ultimately draws. We've learned that providing a space for people of color to engage with each other around politically relevant topics can be part of the healing process. And we've learned that food is a powerful tool to bring people together. There's a communal spirit to it that adds an important layer to programming. And we've learned to always be open to new possibilities. Just because it's never been done in a museum before doesn't mean that it won't work. Next slide. And this is just in closing to show you our beautiful new gallery space that replaced the permanent installations. So we're able to show off more contemporary art of the African diaspora. Thank you. Oh yeah, now I'll pass it on to Evelyn Orantes.
Hi, everyone. Evelyn Orantes here. Just to start my talk, just a reminder, well, if you know me, you know that I formerly worked at the Oakland Museum in California, and as of 2017 have been an independent consultant. So this is a little bit of a flashback as to my role when I was at the Oakland Museum, but also my transition out. So my department role was as curator of public practice. I was charged with leading the research and conception, development, and execution of a series of community-generated exhibitions and programs. Internally, these exhibitions were approached as experiments that aimed to, one, elaborate, next slide, please. One, elaborate and evolve a community engagement model that was established by the education department at the Oakland Museum in the 1990s. So it was really building on the work of many past colleagues who have been there for decades. Two, it was to build staff capacity in community engagement practices. Part of that was, I don't know how your institutions work, but community engagement tends to fall in certain pockets. It falls in education, the community engagement team, but this was really about trying to expand the people that were well-versed in doing this kind of work. And three was to explore shortened time frames in order to be responsive and timely. Next slide, please. We refer to this series of projects as Oakland Junction. The projects were community conceived and driven. Community collaborators were generators in the project, not just the subject matter. The projects were also about bringing visibility and awareness to unique and urgent community needs and issues. And we're all co-created with the lead artist, a social practice artist. The first in the series was, next slide, please. Who is Oakland? No, sorry, go back one. Yeah, who is Oakland? Who is Oakland? The exhibition featured the work of the artist Chris Johnson and 9 Oakland-based artists reflecting Oakland's celebrations, inspirations, and challenges. Now, next slide, please. The second project was Tell Me Where the Mirrors Go. This was a project with the local Oakland family and artist Maria Mortati that experimented with the different ways people can connect to each other and to ideas found in the museum. Next slide, please. Lastly, there was Oakland I Want You to Know, which explored the current and accelerating social, economic, and demographic changes happening in West Oakland as seen through the eyes of the community. The exhibition featured contributions by over 700 community participants, the work of social practice artist Chris Treggiari, and 3 original short films by filmmaker Alex Ghassan. The exhibition ended on October 30. Next slide, please. And a month later, on Friday, December 2nd, 2016, at approximately 11:20 Pacific Standard Time, a fire broke out in the warehouse known as Ghostship. 36 lives there perished, including that of our collaborator, Alex Gessel. Next slide, please. It was a very scary time for us. Several museum staff members were in attendance at the warehouse party, but thankfully all got out safely. Next slide, please. And then on Monday, December 5th, 2 days after the fire, we were back to work and started conversations on how to respond to this tragedy. So just 5 days later, we were trying to respond to how to do something about this in our community. The team that was leading all the Oakland Junction efforts met and discussed what platforms and resources were available to use. On Friday, December 9, 5 days after, the Oakland Museum of California offered the community a space to share, reflect, and mourn. The Friday nights program became the platform for our use. Next slide, please. Friday Nights at OMCA is an after-hours program with a music marketplace, food trucks, and access to the galleries that takes place every Friday night. We activated flexible spaces that can easily be changed out. So Christine described one space that was intentionally built to change out, quickly. The other one was where you just saw the slide of a big blackboard that if you've been to the museum, as you enter the museum, there's a big blackboard that can easily be changed out, and that's also considered a flexible space. So again, for those of you wanting to be responsive to your community, I think even just in preparation for that commitment, just taking a moment with team members across different teams, and really considering what spaces can easily be adapted at a moment's notice to be responsive to community. Next slide. In addition to the chalkboard and other flexible spaces, we also had a pop-up installation that was created by Chris Tregiari, who also worked with Alex Ghassan on Oakland, I Want You to Know. The DJ normally the DJ plays different theme music. Sometimes it's salsa night, sometimes it's a variety of music, but in order to be responsive to how the community was reacting and really mourning in this moment, the DJ played music in honor of those who perished in the fire. Next slide, please. So another aspect was, again, these are gestures that can go a long way. The tables that normally are put out for Friday nights to accommodate individual groups were brought together to prompt conversations and interactions among strangers. So this Ghostship happened, and then just 10 days later, I departed the Oakland Museum to become a consultant. Luckily, I was already hired and invited to be a guest curator for the upcoming exhibition, Metamorphosis and Migration, the Day of the Dead Biennale at the Oakland Museum. And I knew that wasn't the end of me honoring the life of my colleague, Alex, and those who perished during the fire. I knew that there would be a need to do something in the exhibition in honor of the Ghostship. The museum also wanted to extend an invitation to the Ghostship community for a private viewing and reception. At the same time, I was also approached by the Unity Council to aid them in navigating the creative community for their response to Ghostship. So Unity Council, if you don't know or aren't familiar with them, is a nonprofit social equity development corporation with a 55-year history in the Fruitvale neighborhood of Oakland. They provide public housing. They're an amazing organization. They developed the Fruitvale Village, which was 2 blocks away from the Ghostship warehouse. They are known for hosting the second largest Day of the Dead festival in the country. Shortly after the fire, local artists approached them about putting a community altar in honor of the Ghostship, but Unity Council hesitated and didn't want to do that without checking in with some of the families of the Ghostship. Unity Council also wanted to offer resources, but didn't have a way to reach out to the Ghostship community. So both institutions had resources to offer, but given the close proximity to this tragedy and the rawness of emotion at the time, were having a hard time connecting with people to share those resources. So I was invited and asked to help them navigate that. Both organizations really wanted to serve community by extending those resources, but didn't have the inroads. The Ghostship fire also brought in an increased attention to Oakland's housing issues. The tensions in the city were further aggravated by another fire that happened just 3 months later in West Oakland. In this fire, not as many lives perished, but it was notable that the mostly African American families affected were not given the same amount of aid and support from the public or attention from the media as Ghostship. I realized that the only way to navigate this landscape was not to be in service to community, but to be in community. In this case, it meant attending events, having coffee, crying with folks, being vulnerable, and coming to the table not as a representative of an institution, but as an individual and community member. By being in community, I was able to connect with Vital Arts. Vital Arts is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide safe, affordable, live, work, art, and performance spaces. It started by Edwin Birnbaum. His son, Jonathan, perished in the Ghostship fire. And next slide, please. And just 1 year later, at the 1 year anniversary mark of Ghostship, Oakland Museum of California, Unity Council, elected officials from the city of Oakland, Vital Arts, and Oakland residents honored the lives of lost in Ghostship. So the slide that you're looking at now is the Ghostship site. And I was able to, through the Unity Council, to connect with one of the altar maker artists that is affiliated with that institution, and reach out to other people through Chelsea from Vital Arts, and really try to create a space for the 1 year anniversary where people could participate in ways of mourning, and that were definitely bridges between this site and the Oakland Museum Day of the Dead exhibition. So next slide, please. For example, the same notes that were provided for visitors to leave memories or wishes or their thoughts to the victims of the Ghostship fire were also used on the actual site. So there was a bit of a bridge and definitely collaboration amongst lots of different people to make sure that both sites were activated in ways that were welcoming and provided sacred space for community. Next slide. So in conclusion, I leave you with this question. What is the difference between serving community and being in community? Next slide. Thank you.
So I guess we're at the moment where we were going to open it up for questions. I see we have probably about 5 minutes left. But one thing, so I guess perhaps Celeste could help us navigate any questions that have come in. Or we welcome any of you to give us your thoughts on the 2 questions that are up, that we've posed to you throughout the presentation. Or if you have any other questions, we are here to respond.
Christine, I don't see that there are any questions, but let's ask Lacey if there were any questions in chat that I perhaps just didn't see.
Okay.
This is Lacey. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but we do invite everyone on the call to chime in if you have any questions or comments in relation to the questions that the speakers have asked. Thanks.
I also want to encourage those of you who are watching to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. And also our presenters, if you have questions for each other. I know that you have worked on this session before at the conference, but I wonder if perhaps there have been some evolution of your projects that bring to light new ways of looking at the work that you're doing. And I see there is one question to Moad. So that would be for you, Elizabeth. Were there any children's food programming for the Food Justice exhibition?
We did do a program last December specifically for children. It was called Recipes for Resistance, which is not a very youthful title for a program, but it was actually directed towards children, and we invited school groups to come in for it. And again, we actually had the same DJ, Kava Motivation. He does this, he has this thing where he hooks up fruits and vegetables to his DJ system, and he can use them to play beats. So he set this up, and he had the kids come up and help him make music, tapping the fruits and vegetables. And then we had Bryant making smoothies out of fresh vegetables that had just been purchased from the farmer's market down the street, and just talking about different ways that that growing your own food, buying organic food, and making your own food is a much healthier way to eat. And it was especially the part where the kids were able to participate and interact with the fruit and vegetables that were making music. It was really, really beautiful. It was great. And I would say we probably have children present at almost every program that we do in the Chef in Residence program. It's a fairly family-oriented program, but that is the one specific one that was created for youth. And then actually, Brian also, I think I mentioned he goes into schools, and on one instance, the YMCA and works with kids in the classroom as well, and we facilitate that.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Sorry, Celeste, did you want to repeat? Did you have a question for us, or were there other questions out there from the audience?
I don't see any of the questions out there from the audience, but I am intrigued by Evelyn's question, serving community. What's the difference between serving community and being in community? So I would like to ask our panelists to respond to that. I know we got Evelyn's response herself, but I'm wondering if Whitney or Elizabeth or Christine, if any of you three have a response to that question.
I think it's a really interesting question to ask and a lens to think about community engagement. I think community engagement is a buzzword that everybody uses, and I think poking at the nuances of what do we mean by that is a valuable conversation to have. And so this question to me does push that thinking of what does it mean? And for me, and obviously Evelyn and I come from the same institution, but that the being in community to me is what co-creation can help facilitate. So I think the work that Whitney and Ma is doing to me is very genuinely about being a part of something instead of and not being on the outside of something, becoming a part of. I mean, the Oakland Museum resides in Oakland. It's a part of Oakland, and what are the ways in which we can become part of that community and not just do something for a community? And it's a nuanced way of thinking about it. But I would certainly I would look to the work that Ma's doing, and I'm curious what you have to say, Whitney.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to jump in on that. I think, like, for me personally, and I think that this is also something that's shared within our staff, is the difference is that it's an exchange and it's an awareness of us being part of the community, not that we're serving necessarily, but that we are kind of a core part of like the fabric of what happens here. So there's an accountability. There are a lot of personal relationships that are generated through the development of these exhibitions. I know that I've walked away with like some really good friends who are older adults through this process. And it really kind of touches a lot of very personal places for a lot of people, just in terms of like, we're not creating a product for the community. It's not that kind of transactional exchange. It's that we're creating something that we feel foundationally is good for us as a whole.
Yeah, I would completely concur. I have also worked, I think it's relationship building is key. And that does mean exactly what Evelyn said. It's going to their events, breaking bread with folks. And I also have walked away with relationships that friends that I turn to.
I'm curious. Like there's an element. Elizabeth, let me just say one thing, and then we'll hear from you definitely. It also sounds like there's an element of authenticity and integrity in there too. Like you're honoring the relationship with the community rather than it just being transactional. So yeah, great. Elizabeth, you were going to say something or contribute?
I was just going to reiterate the importance of partnerships and really building relationships with organizations that are working more on the ground, especially because I'm not doing something that I have 6 months or 8 months to plan in the way that that the exhibitions at MA are. And so you really end up relying on developing relationships with people who are doing the kind of work that you share values with, and that again, you end up building relationships with those folks, going back to them coming to you, and it becomes a real two-way relationship. It's not just the elite museum asking for help from this other organization over and over again, but more about working together and developing and creating together.
If I could just this is Evelyn, if I could just quickly add to that, I think is really one of the things that I feel like I really got from working is definitely all the things all my colleagues just said: building relationships, not making it transactional, really trying to be in community. But I think one of the differences is, like, as museums, we feel like all our stuff is so valuable, whatever that stuff is, whether it's program space, programs, exhibitions. I think fundamentally for me is entering the conversation and asking what they think we can do with them. So, and I think that's really important in partnerships in general. But I think that's one of the things that I've been able to wrap my head around when thinking about being in service. And being in service, here's all my great stuff. How do you want to use it? Versus what stuff do you need, and do I have it even? Or maybe you just need me to help you promote your programs. So it's really kind of going further and looking at your intentions. And is your intention only to get people to come to your museum, or really to be part of the community?
Yeah. Thank you, Evelyn. I have one last question, maybe before we, conclude our program for today, and that's, what for those individuals that might feel that they don't have the support of their institution or their leadership, or their institution is a little nervous about embarking on something that might be controversial or might be hot topic that they might be getting in the middle of something, what advice would you have for those individuals? And Evelyn, let's start with you.
Oh, wow. Well, I think this came up in some version during the CAM conference. And don't quote me, but I always feel like if you can prototype, if you can test out a way of responding in a way that's a little like quiet and maybe not a lot of people are looking, is there a moment where you can just try something out, and if it fails, there's not a lot of eyes on you, and if it succeeds, then make sure you're documenting as you go along so that you can show your boss and be like, look, this was great. So what's like a baby step you can take? And because without knowing where any of the institutions are and what they're wanting to achieve through something like this, I just think take a chance and don't put your job on the line. I don't want anybody to get fired, but definitely there's a moment of risk if you really want to do this. I feel like I did stuff on weekends when I knew no one was going to be around and tried something. And when it was really successful, I was like, look, this was awesome. And when it wasn't, I kind of like, okay, well, no one was there to see, so it's all good.
Yeah, I think Evelyn's right. Experimentation is key. And it's truth testing that it works and that people want it. So in whatever way you can figure out to, in a small scale, prove to those who disbelieve that it works. Mm-hmm. And I think it probably takes lots of different forms.
Yeah.
And maybe researching other places that have done something, or others, look to outside examples you can that you can point folks to prove it works. People are interested. Yeah. Elizabeth or Whitney, did you have anything?
I was thinking similar, just to try and find examples of other places that have done what you want to do. And I do think it's important to sort of push the envelope and step outside your comfort zone, because that's always going to be the more rewarding place. Mm-hmm. And also, like what Evelyn said, don't get fired over it. Figure out where that line is that you shouldn't cross, and then just go right up to it.
I think one other element of it too, just to chime in, is that if you're thinking about doing something or experimenting with something, there's a very, very high chance that someone else in the community has already done it or is doing it right now. And starting conversations with those people who are already doing the work is really, really great. And finding ways to work with them and amplify that work and bring other people into it in a positive and productive, reciprocally beneficial way is kind of amazing. So I think that's a big piece of it too, at least for me.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you all very much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us and with the museum colleagues on the line and future watchers on YouTube. So we appreciate your time and your expertise for sure. So that concludes our webinar for today. It's been a wonderful experience. I appreciate your leadership, that you are, empowering museums to address these community issues. And I hope that you've inspired those who are on the line to take some steps to also be in community as well as serve community. So, thank you. In closing, I want to just give a shout out to those of you who are watching for the CAM conference that's coming up in Los Angeles, March 4th through the 6th. In downtown LA. We've got some wonderful tours. We're going to have like over a dozen tours that LA museums are hosting on our pre-conference day, and a terrific program that is going to be other programs like this, like museums talking about how they're being active in community. So please visit our website if you want more information about that. And we look forward to sharing more wonderful sessions with you in the future. So thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.